traveled from Montreal and other places to get here for this event. And I'd like to reinforce that greeting because I know among our audience there are several people who actually have done a lot of work on this issue, and we're eagerly looking forward to hearing from all of you, your insight, your experience, your evidence that you bring back from the work that you've done in the field, on the ground, in many places. So my job is simply to try and set the context for this discussion. And let me do that in the following ways. First, I'll just make some general points, then I'll talk about the format. We also have a video from PBS that we're going to roll after I speak and before we engage with our keynote speakers. So the first point I want to make is that recently there's been some rather good news coming out of Africa. Good news, that is, if you look at the statistics and the announcements coming out of the World Bank. Headcount poverty levels are lower than they've ever been, less than 50%. And the trend is down, the level of poverty is down all across Africa. This is new. Economic growth is accelerating across the continent. Again, this is broadly based across all regions in Africa. Deaths from malaria are down significantly, at least by 30% over the last 10 years. Another less observed development is on aid dependence. The degree of aid dependence has declined, which, in my view, and those of others, including the somewhat notorious Dambisa Moyo, aid dependence should be diminished. Yet, if one looks at these broad aggregate indications, one is not necessarily getting the full picture. All is not completely well below the surface. And that's indeed what we're here to discuss this morning. As the title of our roundtable suggests, there's a new scramble for African resources, for African land, for African minerals, for African water. And how that is taking place and why is going to be the focus of our discussion. The issue of grabbing land is not new, but has now become an international issue in the way it has not been in the past, enlisting concerns from the World Bank and from the UN, which has recently adopted guidelines to limit farmland acquisitions. So our panel of experts is here today to talk about why land grabbing is taking place in Africa at a seemingly accelerated pace, what the impacts are, and what can be done about it. Let me make it clear that our purpose is not to simply condemn outright land acquisitions in Africa, but to hold land acquisitions to closer analytical scrutiny, to look at the evidence that we have available from the field as to why these land acquisitions are taking place and what the impacts are. Who gains, who loses, who are the winners and losers from these transactions. Everyone in this room should know that Africa sorely needs investment in agriculture. How is that investment in agriculture going to take place? Is land acquisition a good way of bringing about greater investment in African agriculture? This is something that we should reflect on. Now, you will note that there's a great deal of strength on our panel on Ethiopia. At least 3 of our speakers are either from Ethiopia or done field work in Ethiopia. But while that will be a source of strength and insight into the discussion, I also wanted to make it clear that our focus is more broadly on Africa as a whole. And 2 of our panelists certainly bring a broader perspective and knowledge about other parts of Africa besides Ethiopia as well. So let me just say a couple of other things. On your seats, there are some cue cards, which, if you prefer to write down a comment or question for the consideration of the panel, please do so. Matt Gaudreau at the back will collect them and bring them to our attention. If you prefer to simply stand up and speak, that's not only acceptable but encouraged. Okay, we want to engage with you in this discussion as well and see what evidence and what perspectives and insights you bring to the issue. So let me just now talk about the format of the event. We're not going to do the traditional thing of long introductory speeches by panelists. I've asked each of the panelists to talk for 5 minutes to tell us where they're coming from on this issue and what they're bringing to the table. And then Bruce Moore has agreed to play the role of facilitator with a series of very pointed questions focused on certain issues on land acquisition, land grabbing, to draw out the knowledge and the perspectives of our panelists, but also to draw out the knowledge and the perspectives and the evidence that people who've joined us today in the audience will bring to the table as well. We had dinner together last night, and we decided that the last hour should be reserved for looking at what can be done. So, in other words, for the first hour and a half, we will be deepening our understanding about what's happening and why. And then in the final hour, we are planning to move on to where do we go from here? What can be done about these issues? Just before we roll a short video, to give you another perspective on the land grabbing issue in Africa, I'd like to thank the University of Ottawa for making this room available and providing the refreshments. I actually wasn't sure that we were going to have refreshments, and I'm glad that people have had a chance to partake. If you want to refill your coffee mug or dip into other things, please do so. We're not going to have a coffee break during the morning. It will get too disruptive, so please help yourself. I'd like to thank the students, the MDB students who've joined us in helping to organize this event. Annie Brunton, who's not here today, but will be joining us later in the morning. We've done lots to bring this together. And Matt Gaudreau has been standing at the back, is helping us to organize the event as well. So thanks to both of them for helping out. Okay, so without any further ado, I would like to suggest that we go to this video from PBS that Obang has brought to our attention, and then I'll briefly introduce each of our speakers.
Now, a struggle over land in western Ethiopia that pits village farmers against the government and land investors. Tonight's story is a part of a multimedia project that looks at the challenge of feeding the world in a time of social and environmental change. It's a NewsHour partnership with the Center for Investigative Reporting, Homeland's Productions, and American Public Media's Marketplace. The project is called Food for 9 Billion. Tonight's correspondent is Cassandra Herman.
The Anuak people of the Gambela region have lived in scattered settlements like this for centuries, growing maize in wetter months and farming closer to the river in the dry season. But last year, the Ethiopian government launched a program called villagization. Officials told the people here they would be relocated to areas with better access to clean water, health, and education. But this woman says they were forced to move under false pretenses.
When we left our farm, our crops were ready for harvest, but they told us to leave them in the field, that we would find plenty of corn and other food in the new place we were moving. But they don't give you enough food to fill you up. They give you food in a small container, but it can't even feed a family for a day.
The plight of the Anuak people is at the heart of a complex battle over land ownership and water rights between farmers, the government, and foreign investors. It's a battle that's being fought in many African countries. The Ethiopian government officially owns title to all the land here, but farmers have the right to use it. The government calls this land abandoned because it's so sparsely populated. But Anuak say they need it, some for grazing, some to lay fallow, and that it's the best farmland in the country.
Moving us to a new village might be good for the government, but not for us. It's not good to move a person from the land they have lived on for generations. Maybe the government thinks we are not worthy enough to live on such beautiful land, and they want to have it.
Over the next 2 years, 1.5 million people in 4 regions of Ethiopia will be relocated. The government insists that the villagization program is voluntary. But Human Rights Watch says Anuak are being forced to move so that the government can lease the land to investors. The rights group recently documented cases of violence and arbitrary arrest.
Land is political. Land is very emotional. And land is our identity.
Anuak leader Okako Julu was a voice of resistance against villagization. Fearing for his life, Ojulu fled Ethiopia and now lives in exile in neighboring Kenya.
And I see my village very small. In the face of this big population coming in, I see a big threat. We need to fight for the future of our children.
Ojulu says it's not just his people's land that's at stake. Gambela, with several rivers and a sizable dam, is rich in water resources.
Water is the driving force behind many agricultural deals on the African continent. This rice farm is owned by a Saudi sheikh and is on land that the Anuak consider theirs. According to the company Saudi Star, when completed, this rice farm will be the largest in Africa.
Objective is to put Ethiopia in the rice map of the world. We would like to export about 1 million tons of rice. We expect about $1 billion of income for the country.
In many places in the world, water is becoming a scarce resource. Saudi Star's rice will go to Gulf nations no longer able to irrigate their own crops. To attract investors to this area of the Nile River basin, the Ethiopian government puts few, if any, restrictions on water usage in its contracts with foreign companies. Saudi Star will spend $2.5 billion on the rice farm, on clearing forest, on their fleet of new tractors and combines, and on experts like Mohammed Manzoor Khan, one of the project's directors.
It's a lot of rice for the world market and local people. This project is generating a lot of income. It can really bring a revolution in food production as well as uplifting the social conditions of the people around.
But Ethiopians don't typically eat rice, and many question the move to grow crops for export when Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa have a long history of periodic hunger caused by war and weather problems.
This country is a country that has suffered food insecurity and famine, still suffers food insecurity, and yet gives out its huge land resources to foreign capital.
Desalin Ramato is a food policy expert with the Forum for Social Studies. He says making sure people have access to food should be the government's priority.
There is no provision in any of the contracts signed by the government and investors. There is no provision for food security, local food security at all. And if there are people who are starving there, it's not their concern.
In the capital, Addis Ababa, The government says the way to ensure people can afford food is to provide jobs through attracting investment in foreign currency. At the Ministry of Agriculture, Director of Investment Isaias Kabede says that as a country of farmers, Ethiopia needs agricultural exports in order to pay for importing necessary items.
To have tractors, to have harvesters, to have other equipment, and to have fertilizer. We are importing fertilizer, we are importing oil, we are importing everything.
But in Gambella, Anuak say they are not seeing the benefits of the country's investment strategy. While companies like Saudi Star now have access to much of the region's best land and water, the leader of this village says they've been moved to drier areas where farming is more difficult.
If they take all the water from the small river, the river will dry up. Then where would we get water? I heard also that they're planning to take water from the lake a few kilometers from here.
The lake he is referring to is the Alwero Dam. Saudi Star is close to finishing an 18-mile canal from the dam to irrigate their rice fields.
If I knew they were moving me so they could sell my land, I would have refused to leave so they could kill me and bury me in my own land. That would have been better.
Many of the relocated communities could face endemic hunger as early as next year, according to Human Rights Watch. Most are still waiting for farms or seed. More than 12 million Ethiopians are currently in need of food assistance. The future for groups like the Anuak grows increasingly uncertain as the global land rush continues, not just in Ethiopia, but in dozens of countries across the African continent.
You can find the first 2 reports in this series at the Food for 9 Billion website. There's a link to it on newshour.pbs.org.
Okay, so let's move into our discussion. I'm going to very briefly introduce each of our speakers. There are longer bios in the folder here, which you can help yourself to if you haven't already. Going from left to right, Anuradha Mittal has joined us from Oakland, California. She's founder and executive director of the Oakland Institute and is an internationally renowned expert on trade, development, human rights, and agriculture. She's received several awards, including being named as Most Valuable Thinker in 2008 by Nation magazine. So, welcome. Next, we have Felix Horne. Felix walks and breathes among us here in Ottawa. He has been working on environmental and socio-cultural issues related to land use in Africa and internationally. He's author and researcher of Human Rights Watch's recent report on villagization in Western Ethiopia entitled Waiting Here for Death. Next, we have Obang Metho, who's also an Ottawa resident, having moved from Saskatoon not so long ago to continue his work on this issue. He's the executive director of the SMNE, which is a social justice movement of diverse Ethiopians. And he's co-sponsored with the Oakland Institute on the series of reports and studies on land grabs across Africa. He and Felix both worked on the report on Ethiopia in that series of reports. Excellent series, which I highly recommend to all of you. There's a link on the page of links that is on his desk if you want to pursue those further. Next, we have Dr. Aklog Birara, who has joined us from Washington, D.C. Dr. Aklog has served in a number of capacities. He's been a banker for much of his career in the commercial banking sector in Ethiopia, but he also served with the World Bank for some 30 years. And in spite of that, he brings an excellent balanced perspective on development issues in Ethiopia to us. But I'd like to point out that he's also the author of a book that's just come out on land grabs in Ethiopia. I think we have a couple of copies here, more are available through Dr. Aklog's website. Last but certainly not least, Bruce Moore is an old colleague and friend of mine. He served on the board of directors of the North-South Institute, among other organizations. But particularly pertinent to this discussion, from 1998 to 2008, Bruce was the founding director of the International Land Coalition in Rome, which is an alliance of UN civil society and multilateral organizations promoting policies to enable the rural poor to gain access to resources. And Bruce is incredibly well connected to the network group working on these issues, including the issue of food security. Bruce has, let me just finally say, kindly agreed to facilitate the discussion that we're going to have by asking our panelists a series of very pointed questions following their opening remark. So let's get right to it. Maybe we can start with Anuradha and proceed from that side to this side. Anuradha, the floor is yours.
If it's okay, sorry, just put recall on this is Felix Horne.
Sure, no problem. I'll keep this really brief, enough to finish a recall. But I think one of the things that fascinates me about this issue is that you can look at it through so many different lenses. Whether it's from an environmental perspective, from a social impact perspective, development issues, macroeconomic development, water, climate change, gender perspective, etc. And I think so many of us look at this issue, understandably, through our own worldview or through the mandate of our organization. So I'm looking forward to this discussion because we have a very diverse group of experts and a very diverse audience as well, and hoping that we can all kind of expand our views a little bit in terms of looking at some of the other perspectives on this issue that we wouldn't normally look at. In terms of what I bring to the table, as was mentioned, I was a consultant on the recent Human Rights Watch report on villagization in Gambella. There's also a report that I researched and wrote that's coming out in the beginning of April, looking at land grab-induced displacement in the South Ormo Valley of Ethiopia. Potentially 200,000 agro-pastoralists are being forcibly removed from their traditional lands. And there was also the research consultant on Ethiopia, and also for Zambia. So I think one of the other things that there's so much discussion about this issue globally, as everyone knows, and I think what is lost a lot of the time is the impact on people. This ultimately is about people. Obviously, they can't be here to express their perspectives on this issue. Like media reports like the one we watched, they're excellent for that. But I'm hoping I can help relay some of what I've seen on the ground, sort of get beyond the headlines, so to speak, for what the impacts really are on the people that are, that are struggling to make ends meet. I think just lastly, when I talk to sort of average Canadians, friends, colleagues about this issue, it's very much viewed as something that happens over there, whichever direction is it. As everyone knows, our food production systems, our global system of finance are so interconnected. We're part of this as much as anyone. And so I think it's great to see so many people here, and I look forward to the discussion where we can talk about how can Canadians make a difference, how is Canada involved in this, directly, indirectly, and how can we enable this to become an issue that gets on the agenda of our politicians, etc. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Felix. Are you set now, Anuradha?
Yeah, sorry about that. Thanks, Felix. First of all, just very, very grateful to be here and to thank Obang and Assembly for ensuring that I'm here. Well, as you mentioned at the Oakland Institute, we launched a project called Understanding Land Investments about 4 years ago. So just in my 5 minutes, I want to kind of highlight our main things from that. We looked at over 50 land deals in about 7 countries in Africa. which include Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, Mali, Mozambique, Zambia, South Sudan, and Tanzania. What we started finding, and the reason we started this project was looking at 2007, 2008, skyrocketing food prices, and this whole question, how will we feed the world, and this rush for land grabs. But one of the things we don't hear much about is the financial crisis was the other driving force, along with food and fuel prices. People looking for the next soft commodities market to invest in. And with the dot-com world not being what it used to be, housing market collapsing, the next thing was agriculture. So you have private equity, hedge funds, people that have nothing to do with agriculture moving into that arena. So they're investing in agriculture. In terms of pace, the famous figure that everyone knows is 2009, 60 million hectares of land were bought or leased by foreign investors, with over 70% of that being in Africa. So yes, we do know foreign plantations have existed. Land has always been an issue. But the pace at which it has happened is just mind-boggling. One of the key findings was the lack of transparency. When we started off this project, very innocently, we thought, we would go into countries, meet with the land bank commissioners, get all the deals, can look at it. It'll be done very straightforward manner. We had no idea what we were getting into. And perhaps if we did, we would not have started off with 7 countries. Basically, there's no transparency. If you look at contracts, if they are ever available, they would be sometimes just a few paragraphs long. Communities that are being displaced don't have access to these materials. People find out that they are being told to move when the bulldozers show up. Or, they're given contracts in English when they might be speaking Mende or whatever language. So that was a huge issue. The other thing I would point out is that media has reported, a lot of people when I bring it up say, oh yeah, the Chinese are in Africa. What our research found is everybody is in Africa. In fact, when it comes to agricultural investments, Chinese are not as prominent as some of the other actors. Yes, they're the Gulf states, but US investors are huge, going back to the point of Felix. What can we do? We think it is the Chinese and the far-off governments and its faraway places like such as Ethiopia, but it is our university endowments, it is our pension funds that are investing in private equity hedge funds who are responsible for this land grabs in places such as Africa. Europeans, Scandinavian churches, to your development agencies, especially DFID, USAID, even Norfund, which would invest in Walmart for labor practices, is very actively involved in it. Just lastly, I wanted to say, I'm a policy wonk. I never thought I would turn into an activist, and it's been a life-changing experience exactly because of what you said. When you're in the field, meeting with communities, hearing what they're going through, it kind of is like being hit on the head, and life is never the same again. You can never look at the land again the same way. One of the things that we found is it's really the Dracula effect, because there's such a lack of transparency. When we have pulled something out totally innocently and put a contract out, you find that it's like Dracula. It has no place to hide and it has no place to run. So we have seen some deals cancelled or stalled just because nobody knew about it. In Tanzania, the largest land deal involving a US investor, once we put it out, that's for the first time in the nation there was a debate about how come we're giving away 800 acres of land for less than 20 cents per hectare. Basically you pay more for coffee here than you would pay for this most fertile, amazing land in Tanzania. Similarly in South Sudan, the deal was cancelled. Legal, what we are recognizing is also the kind of legal support that is essential. So what we are doing now, again, never thought as a policy think tank, we would be doing it in Sierra Leone communities that are facing trials. They were arrested and are facing a court trial because they tried to stop the bulldozers going into their land. They've been facing a court trial, so we're providing legal support to them. And assemblies, because these are all, if you look at single issues, what's happening in Lower Roma or what's happening in some other place, they become single issues. And in Sierra Leone, for the first time ever, we are organizing with the partners a meeting where impacted communities from different parts of the communities of the country are coming together in Freetown, April 1st to 4th, with their own press conference, exactly what you said, Felix, providing a platform where they can speak for themselves. It's high time people can decide what kind of development they want. And lastly, we have been told that, we've been certainly called names left-leaning think tank. I mean, I'm a card-carrying member from India, Communist Party of India is something very respectable in my country. So I want to say, yes, I'm a very proud card-carrying member. However, we're not against investment. We do know that the biggest problem for food security has been that countries in Africa have been told by institutions such as the World Bank and others not to invest in agriculture. So the question is not just about putting money there, but we have to ask what kind of investment and who does it target? Who are the beneficiaries? What kind of trickle-down impact we can expect from these kind of incomes? And our research kind of really looked at not as an ideological debate, but looked at the documents, and again would urge you to visit our website. It clearly shows it's not a win-win situation. What you really start finding is economic loss for countries who are investing or giving away their lands for the prices that I mentioned. And it results in basically a win-win for the investor, but it's seriously going to impact food security, human rights, and other conditions in these countries.
Thanks, Anuradha. On to Obang.
Thank you, Roy. I don't know if there's that much I can say after Anuradha says. I think she put it all. I think that one of the points which has been missing in most of these cases is that we're talking that foreign investors are coming into Africa. But the other people don't see the other angle. Someone has invited them in. And so this is something that which is, I think, I would talk more about. And to some people, when we read about the land grab in Africa, or resource, or water, you may name it. But to people who are close to that, to Africa, it is actually, it's usually, I don't call it a land grab, it's really like a life grab. They're grabbing the life of these people. I've been saying that. I think the angle where I come from is I was, born in Africa. I came when I was 17 to Saskatchewan. So I'm more Saskatoonian. When I'm in Saskatoon, people ask me where are you from. I say, I'm from Saskatoon, from Africa. When I go to Africa, I say I'm from Saskatoon. So depending where you ask me. So Saskatchewan is, been my home. But my family is still there. From southwest of Ethiopia, where you see PBS, those ethnic group, a very tiny ethnic group, the Anuak, they are more to the Sudanese. When the British draw the boundary, some of us who are on the other side of the river become Ethiopian, the other side become Sudanese. So for us, even now, we cross the rivers, to this side, without no checkpoint. But now, what we find is really this land deal is impacted so much on the indigenous people, who have really no voice at all. The ones that who are seen to be aware and speaking up end up being arrested or tortured or run away. So I think that Anuradha put it, accountability and transparency none exist. Usually I try to talk to people about it. In Canada, if you go to Enterprise, you want to rent a car, you will sign at least more than 5 places. In there, it's, no one even see what is the contract. And sometimes it's $1.25 for acres for 99 years. Nobody's seen where, who is really what is there for the people, and the local people have no voice, no say. And so what I will bring into this, as I would say, that more I will talk from the angle of the people who are in there, indigenous. When the people say that, those you see on the videos, those are people who are family, and I know them and this kind of thing. So that's really, it's not secondary to me. It's just something that and I would bring that. And usually I try to bring it to thinking that, now what makes this land rush? Like land rush in Africa, just a huge, started I think as Roy put it. In 2008 there was a food shortage, and there was a riot. And so the people who really thought of the future, they say, well, we have to think about what we will feed our people. So between 2000 and 2010, 204 1 million acre of land is one way or another is being leased. 204 acre of land. Out of 204, 134 are in Africa. And so sometime now we see that, as the PBS lady said, food for 9 billion. Some of these people who are going there to grow the food is to feed their country, to feed their people. But who's really there to feed the Africans? So that is really where, I try to emphasize that, to let the people know that, what makes us to be human is not only the language that we communicate, it's also emotion. A mother who's losing a child in Ottawa hospital is not different than a woman who lost her child under a tree somewhere in Africa or Central America. So in that, I will be talking from that angle of really not only blaming the investors, but also blaming the people as well in there, and not seeing the land investment as completely negative, but also going back historically, that Africa has really never recovered from slavery, from the colonizer going to there, and it's still in a way, in a sense, if you look at it. The first thing that the resources outside the need in Africa was not a land, was not mineral in the Congo, it was people. And then the continent was divided. And when it was divided, no one was on the table. It's the same thing now. The gentleman was speaking in Ethiopia, they make an agreement with the Indian gentleman or an Arab. The local people are not on that table. Just equivalent of that of Berlin Conference. And then we go on now to what's going on. The government in place is not allowing the people to speak. So it really is not just land taking away, it's really taking the livelihood away of these people. And knowing that just a place like Ethiopia where people are starving to death, and then someone wants to grow the food to feed other people. It is just mind-blowing. And then in the conclusion to me, do we really know this? As a good, caring Canadian citizens, the policymaker may know on the head, but do we really know? And if we don't, then maybe we have a responsibility to tell our people we need to make a change.
Thank you, Obang. I'll just add a comment to what you said, that African governments and elites are not only facilitating land acquisition by foreigners, but they're also partaking in land acquisition themselves. They are part of a land grab activity that's going on. The elites are actually grabbing land for themselves. So that's something that we should bear in mind in looking at this issue. So, Dr. Aklog.
Thank you very much. First, I am just impressed by the diversity of those who are attending, and by the diversity of the sponsors and the speakers. So I'm very happy to be here. I come from a development angle that is somewhat different, and I'm not saying it just here. I said it as well for many years. To me, development must be anchored in people, in human beings. That's what reduction in poverty is all about. It is really building the capacities, the capabilities of people. The anchor of that development anywhere in the world resides with natural resources. How those natural resources are used in order to advance the common good, i.e. the poor, the welfare of people, is really at the heart of the debate with regard to natural resource transfers. If I were to take, and I think, the details, I will not bore you with details. I'm verbose and I'm detailed and all that stuff. So I will be as precise as I could, but I'm going to be provocative. So you would have to forgive me. The details I have researched land grab using primary data, Ethiopian sources as well as international sources, so it's documented in the book that I have here. So I will use that. But let me just take you and paint a picture in your mind, please. I'll take Ethiopia. It's described